Good evening. This is the Channel 1 News from Moscow. We can probably expect the greatest difficulties in the next 3 months. This was the topic of discussion today in the Russian Supreme Soviet. The parliament adopted a law for the Russian Federation on the budget system for the first quarter of this year. The government is allowed to spend 420.5 billion rubles. Today, in Minsk, the deputy parliament speakers of the Commonwealth states met. $11 billion is the sum the CIS countries may receive from the West as a result of the international conference in Washington. Land has been found for the Volga Germans. Georgia. Peace negotiations break down as opposing forces face off in the western part of that country. These are the headlines. Now more detail about these and other stories. The normal life of the country will be possible only with a stable economy, and a stable economy is impossible without a balanced budget. Economic reform has not yet become irreversible, says the President Yeltsin. Financial stability is possible only without budget deficits. And also, many believe, when we see a unified team working for the good of Russia. Today, the government returned again to criticism by the parliament, which discussed the budget for the first quarter. This discussion began only at the end of January, and the Russian government was permitted to spend in the first quarter 420.5 billion rubles. The main budget revenues will come from the international trade in the sum of 228 billion rubles, from value-added and excise taxes, 160 billion rubles. Resources for creating social security and pension funds will be 145.7 billion rubles. The main budget expenditures will be social programs, 226.5 billion for education and health care, 50.4 billion on military expenditures. The parliament allocated about 6 billion rubles for cultural programs, or 1/8 of the requested amount. However, all of these figures are largely conditional due to the difficulty of forecasting the rate of inflation. The debates on the budget began before the morning session in the lobby. The new deputies' politics group dispersed their leaflets criticizing the government, and they recommended the government make essential changes in the budget. The territorial budget is 27 billion rubles, different from the Republican budget's total. This is very strange. As was the case before, the central government is attempting to regulate. The government very much wants to make the regional governments come to here and ask for money. The central government does not want the republics, the regions, to live independently. What do you think about the fear that military forces will react against the reduction by 7 times in spending on them? This is explained by the decrease in arms purchases and the closing of several military facilities. Other factories will work at minimal capacity. The positive side of the proposed budget for the first quarter consists in the fact that for the first time, 63% of the budget will be spent on social needs, social purposes. At the same time, Russian Vice Premier Yegor Gaider believes that reforms are proceeding in accordance with our plans. The greatest threat to economic reform, he believes, is disruption of coal and metal deliveries to enterprises and the possible social upheavals resulting from them, Gaidar said in an interview to Komsomol Pravda. Another problem which the Russian parliament is deciding is the issue of the transfer of the Crimean region from Russian to Ukrainian jurisdiction. This issue was introduced into the agenda by deputies from the faction Fatherland and Russia. The Crimea has been in dispute for over 200 years. Crimea was conquered during the Russo-Turkish War and then in 1783 was annexed to Russia. Sevastopol became the main military port of the region. In 1921, Crimean Autonomous Region was created, and in 1954, in the year of the 300th anniversary of annexation, Khrushchev decided to transfer the Crimea into the jurisdiction of the Ukraine. At the same time, many people remember the January 11th meeting between Yeltsin and Kravchuk, at which both sides agreed not to make territorial claims on the other. And here is the Ukrainian point of view on this issue. It was expressed by the Republic's foreign minister Zlenka. It seems to me that in terms of the Crimea, we have a legal basis to resolve this question. I believe that the people themselves should determine the status of the Crimea. It appears that all problems cannot be solved by parliamentary declarations. There's a danger that the Crimea will become a precedent for other conflicts within the Russian Federation. We remember the tragic situation in Yugoslavia, which began as a territorial conflict among two neighboring republics. In creating the Commonwealth of Independent States, we have somehow forgotten about the highest governmental organs of the republics, their parliaments and supreme soviets. Today in Minsk, the first interparliamentary meeting of the Commonwealth states was held. Representatives of 10 states participated. Several documents were adopted about a council of the leaders of the parliaments of the Commonwealth countries. The council will meet at least twice per year. Working groups will work in the various capitals of the Commonwealth countries. They also adopted a decision to create interparliamentary commissions to undertake joint activities. Russia proposed creating a parliamentary assembly of CIS states. However, Ukraine and Belarus believe that the time for this idea has not yet come. We have just received information that today in the Kremlin, President Yeltsin received the U.S. ambassador to Russia, Mr. Strauss. The ambassador relayed a personal message from the U.S. president expressing the desire of the American government to organize a so-called airlift to Russia to provide food and other aid to Russia and the other republics. It seems that our internal problems are the subject of global attention. It is said by some that the threat from the former Soviet Union is greater now than during the Cold War. The International Conference on Coordinating Aid to the CIS countries was held today in Moscow, and the territory of the Commonwealth was declared a disaster area. The 47 countries participating in the countries, according to Reuters, will agree to provide aid and credit in the amount of $11 billion to the Commonwealth. There was a press conference at the U.S. State Department today at which the results of the 47-country conference were announced. They discussed aid to the newly forming governments of the former Union. U.S. Secretary of State James Baker declared the meetings productive. Their participants of the meetings developed a concrete plan for assistance and decided to meet next week in Minsk with the conference's contact group. James Baker declared that beginning February 10th, U.S. Air Force transport planes will begin delivering food and medical supplies to Russia and the other newly independent countries. In 1 or 2 weeks, 54 such flights will take place. This is being paid for from resources allocated earlier. In the near future, also, 3,500 American volunteers will head to the Commonwealth countries. German Foreign Minister Hans-Dietrich Genscher noted that the countries of the CIS will receive technical assistance to limit harvest losses and store crops. Genscher also expressed the hope for active efforts by Western firms for housing construction in the former Soviet republics. Judging by the results of the conference, we cannot yet expect new credits, but the international assistance mechanism is being created, which should begin working soon. Commenting on the results of the meeting, the New York Times says that the amount of humanitarian aid promised to the former Soviet Union is small. But the gesture itself is important, as the newspaper adds, because it gives the citizens of the Republic the belief that the West is with them. They agreed at this conference to create an international ruble stabilization fund, but not immediately. Moreover, a working group was formed by the conference to coordinate efforts of the world community in 5 areas: medicine, food, energy, housing construction, and technical assistance. Americans and their allies are now waiting for us to take decisive action, including the creation of market structures and the accompanying legislation, sharp reductions in the nuclear arsenal, and rational measures in relations with one another. The conference is over, but the serious crisis between Russia and the Ukraine over Crimea remains. If it becomes a new Nagorno-Karabakh, then we can expect not assistance, but a quarantine. Speaking at the conference, U.S. Secretary of State James Baker said that if all of this were taking place in conditions of war, then the West could christen this operation Hope that we survive.